There has been a lot of civil unrest in the UK in recent weeks. After 3 young children were stabbed to death in Southport by a man of Rwandan heritage, for many British nationals, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And they took to the streets in protest to voice their anger and frustration at years of unfettered immigration and to demand that the government finally start securing the border. The problem is that successive British governments, mostly conservative ones it's got to be said, have been turning a blind eye to illegal immigration for years, even though British citizens have continually tried to express their concern through democratic channels about this issue. Their voices have simply been continually ignored by the elites. Brits voted for a reduction to illegal immigration through elections at 2010, 2015. Brexit in 2016 was largely driven by this immigration issue, and again in 2019 they kept voting for the party who stood on a lower immigration platform. And yet, despite the endless campaign promises and manifestos from leaders that illegal immigration would be reduced by their government during their term, numbers have simply continued to soar, as can be seen vividly on this graph. In fact, far from securing the borders, the UK Border Force have often been seen going out to facilitate the arrival of illegal immigrants by giving them a taxi service across the English Channel from France. Upon landing upon British shores, arrivals are then instantly given free accommodation, food, healthcare, dentistry and allowance, and this all happens at the taxpayer's expense. For some time, it's been clear that many of these arrivals are not refugees at all, but simply economic migrants deliberately coming to live on these benefits, essentially abusing the generosity of the British welfare system and the hospitality of the British taxpayer. Here's a graph from Denmark showing the net contribution to public finances in that country. Danes and other Western immigrants are net contributors to their system. They pay in to that system, whereas immigrants from the Middle East and North Africa are net detractors. They take out from that system. Overall then, the Danes are effectively working and paying taxes to support people who are coming into their country not to contribute, not to pay into the system, but simply to live off of the Danish largesse. A similar thing is happening in Britain, and I think it's fair to say that Brits have been quite patient and accommodating about this issue overall. However, as the years have passed, the patience has gradually been wearing thin, in part because many migrants don't seem to be thankful for all of their free things. Here's a woman complaining that her free house isn't up to scratch and she wants the British taxpayer to give her a bigger one. Here's another man complaining that his free hotel room in London is too small for his liking and he wants one with a bigger bathroom and better Wi-Fi. But what's really stretching the patience is, after having been given all of these free houses and money and benefits, some are making no effort whatsoever to integrate into British communities and ways of life, nor to adopt British customs and values either. Quite the opposite, in fact. The influx of illegal immigration has brought with it a large increase in acts of criminality and violence against local populations. Here's another graph from Denmark that breaks down violent crime since 2010 by country of origin. The violent crime is predominantly coming from people from Middle Eastern Islamic backgrounds, and indeed the Danes themselves are 43rd on their own list. And that kind of brings us to the crux of the issue, which up until now we've only been skirting around, which is that the majority of the problems are simply coming from one source, and that is Islam. Most of their backgrounds have a pretty good history of integration into the UK except for one. The majority of the violence is coming from Muslims. The lack of financial contribution is mainly from Muslims, as we saw before, and the lack of integration is mainly amongst Muslims. Indeed, at the height of the Islamic State, or ISIS, in 2014, more Muslims based in Britain chose to fight for the caliphate, for the enemy, than for the British Army. And that briefly shone a spotlight on the fact that Muslims coming to Britain, though they lived in the UK, seemed to have no allegiance or love for this country.
In an England where multiculturalism lies in pieces, Luton exemplifies just how much has gone wrong. This small town, just 20 minutes north of London, has become synonymous to the British media with everything that's wrong with Islam. The other week, an entire family of 12 left this street and headed off to join the caliphate in Syria. This week, 2 men from this boring-looking road were up in court, accused by the police of a plan to blow up a military base. And on the main street, sitting with a coffee, is a convert currently on bail after allegedly distributing leaflets in central London supporting ISIL.
While many cultures have shown a willingness to integrate, a willingness to learn about British values and have successfully assimilated into British life, there's a persistent problem from Islamic immigrants who have a remarkably poor record of integration and often convey an unconcealed hatred even of the Western nations who are hosting them, a hatred of their values, their freedoms, their democracies and their customs. This comes through in terrorist attacks like in London and the Manchester Arena bombing. It came through in the Lee Rigby murder and the soldier stabbed in Kent just this year. It came through in the discovery that gangs of Muslim men in England have for decades been targeting young white English girls for trafficking, prostitution and rape. It's come through in the establishment of Islamic enclaves where men have gone on patrol to demand that Brits conform to Sharia law while on their patch. It's come through in their attempts to establish blasphemy laws in Britain, the intimidation and violence against teachers who've been forced to flee and go into hiding in the midst of death threats. Their attempts to make British food halal, the countless demonstrations on our city streets for Gaza and even for the movies they don't like, the blocking of the road for prayer times and their insistence that Brits should adapt and conform to them rather than the other way around, shouting on social media that they're going to take over Europe and European countries now belong to them. It's been seen in crowds of Muslim men roaming British streets with swords and knives and machetes, shouting Allahu Akbar, looking for white people to intimidate and fight and injure. In this incident, they roamed Birmingham, attacking innocent bystanders. Now, unfortunately, the far-left British government and ideologically captured police force are refusing to understand the concerns of ordinary British people, much less intervene. Indeed, while they allow Muslims to rampage around cities with swords and knives and machetes like this and are nowhere to be seen, they turn up in riot gear and crack down hard on anyone who expresses concern about any of these things, branding them far-right and throwing them into jail. This has led to Keir Starmer, the current Prime Minister, being given the nickname Two-Tier Keir. He's showing a soft brand of policing for Muslims, but a brutal brand for nationals. Indeed, while British nationals are being fast-tracked to jail for protesting, this man, a Labour councillor, is being given the soft treatment despite openly calling to slit people's throats. In truth, the British government is approaching communist levels of tyranny, putting people in jail for thinking the wrong thoughts and voicing the wrong opinions, for social media posts, for retweeting memes. They're threatening lockdowns and banning social media so they can maintain control of the narrative. They're threatening arrest for just being an observer of a protest. They're threatening to use facial recognition technology to stop people even travelling to protests in future. And all this chaos has left so many British people feeling scared for their future and for the future of their country. The UK government's own website says the first duty of government is to keep citizens safe and the country secure. So when the government breaks that contract and even worse turns on British nationals who speak out their concerns, it's leaving them with a deep sense of despair. As I've watched the conversation around this unfolding on social media, I think the overriding impression I'm getting is that many Brits are in a state of mourning right now. They are heartbroken that the country they love is being destroyed in front of their eyes by people who don't even like Britain and who at the first opportunity would put it all under Sharia law. There's a deep sense of betrayal, a deep sense of pain and sadness, a sense of helplessness. Many of them have been speaking about the long-standing sense of British decency and fair play and honesty and commitment to freedom, freedom of speech, how their grandfathers went to war to fight for their freedoms, and how this green and pleasant land that they grew up in and love is now being overrun by people that don't share their values and who hate them, and they're not even allowed to protest about it. As I was watching the reaction online, this video came up on my YouTube recommendations. It's called Civil War in Britain, How Should Christians Respond? It's actually a Catholic channel, but I thought they made a really interesting point here.
Because Islam comes in order to murder, kill and rape. And as he rightly said, is how many Muslim women have been gang raped by white groups in England in the last 10 years? And he said, the answer is none. Do you know how many girls have been gang raped by Muslim gangs in Telford, one city, in the last few years? Over 1,000. So he said, it's not everybody else behaves normally. What I'm against, he said, is this particular religion, which is so dangerous. He didn't
say everybody else behaves normally, did he?
Well, yeah, no, he didn't. No, I'm summarising.
No, because I mean that's as blinkered and wrong as any. It can't be that simple. Of course, there's problems with
no,
Islam.
I think it is. No, I think it is.
It can't
no,
be all non-Muslims behave sensibly and are perfectly fine, and
Okay.
the Muslims aren't.
Let me choose my words more carefully.
Yeah.
All the human failures that human beings are prone to are spread evenly across different systems. So, if you like, the sins of humanity are spread evenly through Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Christianity.
Human.
I think, it's a human. And the point that Robinson is making is that there's one religion, which is also a political system, which endorses some of the barbarism that is spread evenly through the others, and thereby endorsing it intensifies it. And what it endorses is war, rape, murder, and control. Now, Buddhism, Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity don't do that. In fact, they're specifically against it. Islam does do it. It's in the Quran, and it practices it. What I'm against is Islam. And I think that's a perfectly factually accurate, reasonable position to take.
Yes, it may well be reasonable. You, me and Mark have spoken about the difficulty with the clash of cultures when it comes to Islam and the UK and the loss of our Christian identity. Perhaps, do you think we'd be better off calling for all those people protesting on the streets to be going into churches if they're so worried about the loss of our Christian civilization, whether they can recognise it as such or not? That's what it is. There's a sense in which you think you get what you deserve. If Islam comes to the UK, takes over, and makes it an Islamic country, on one hand you can say, well, we're so annoyed with the Muslims, we're so annoyed with Islam, how dare they? And on the other, you say, where were you? Where were you for the last few hundred years when you abandoned churches, when you stopped going to masses, when you stopped devotions at home, when you stopped praying? So surely a better response would not be to burn down migrant hotels, but to say, tell you what, next Sunday when the weekend comes and the Muslims are parading around on the streets and rioting, fill the churches, spill out of the churches, go to mass, get on your knees. Would that not be more effective?
Do you know what? She's right. The United Kingdom is essentially a Christian country. Christianity came here around 450 AD, and ever since, this whole island has been gradually shaped and formed and molded by Christian teaching, Christian ideas, Christian theology. Our entire legal system, English common law, is founded upon biblical precepts. Our sense of right and wrong, good and evil, was given to us by Christianity. Our sense of decency, honesty, and fair play, all of those things that British people love about our own culture, it's all derived from Christianity. You know how they say that Brits love standing in queues, for example? Well, that comes to us from Jesus' teaching to put others before yourself. In many non-Christian countries, when a bus comes along, everyone gets their elbows out and starts fighting for seats. Brits don't do that. Why? Why do they queue and say after you? Because of imbibed Christian theology. All of our cultural norms come to us from the Bible. It was Jesus who taught us, for example, that it's better to give than to receive. So out of that has come our sense of charity, volunteering, helping the poor and downtrodden, looking out for your fellow human beings. Look into the origin of all our oldest charities in this country, and you'll find a Christian founder explicitly motivated by Christian ideals. It was Christians who invented the modern idea of hospitals, free education for all, for the deaf and the blind. Christians invented Braille. Christians were the first ones responsible for ending the slave trade. Slavery was first abolished in the UK. Why? Because of Christians. William Wilberforce, James Stephen, Thomas Clarkson, Hannah More, all Christians explicitly motivated by their faith in Jesus Christ. Christians were the first ones to introduce child labour laws so that employers can no longer send kids down mine shafts and up chimneys, exploiting them for labour. Christians did that. Christians founded our universities. Cambridge was founded by a bishop. All of our best architecture is Christian. Our most enduring poetry and songs, our holidays in this country are all Christian. Christianity gave us our ideas of democracy. There's a reason the Magna Carta was written here, and it gave us our ideas about freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and the importance of love and the importance of truth, the importance of sexual ethics as well. It all comes from Christianity. All the precepts of Christianity have seeped and soaked into every corner of our society, which is why Britain became this bastion of freedom and democracy, this place of safety, health, and prosperity. It's why it's a high trust society. The Bible says don't steal and be honest. So when I was growing up, for example, we didn't even lock the front door on our house when we went out. Neighbours would look out for each other. There was community spirit, village fetes, barbecues, bake sales. Fruit sellers still leave their produce out on the streets unguarded in this country in the knowledge people will be honest, won't steal. They'll take it and decide to pay. Biblical righteousness created an overall sense of coziness and togetherness, looking out for one another. There was a sense of order. There was a sense of calm and peace across the land.
So what do you think about the fair?
It's just quintessentially British.
What were you saying about Britain in the summer?
Oh, it's just, you can't beat it, can you? I mean, for 2 months a year, and we don't know which 2 months those are, it's the ones when it's sunny, but it's just the best country in the world. I mean, this grass is just so soft that I'm walking around like a hobbit. The sun is in the air, the sky is blue.
It's good that the sun's in the air.
I know. But you know what I mean, and everyone is happy.
If that resonates with you, and if you love Britain for those reasons, those ones I've just highlighted, then what you really love is Christendom. You love a culture created by Christianity. A society founded upon Christian ideals and ideas has been passed down to you from praying, church-going, Bible-reading generations of ancestors before you, and you have been blessed by them to inherit the country that they made. As the historian Tom Holland famously says, everyone living in the West has for centuries essentially been swimming in Christian waters.
The core thesis is that we are goldfish swimming in Christian waters.
Okay.
And we don't recognize that we are in a goldfish bowl. And we in the West tend to assume that things that are actually very culturally contingent, a product of the 2,000 years of the Christian Revolution. The risk is assuming that it's just the way things are, that it's human, that we do things because that's what human nature is, that there are that our understanding of what is the right thing to do is inherent within us, that there's a kind of inherent morality. But it's not just in the dimension of morals or ethics. It's the way that we comprehend society. It's the way that we understand sexuality. It's the way that we understand gender. It's almost every aspect of our lives is shaped by the weathering effects of Christianity.
We have become so used to the goodness of Christianity, soaking and permeating into every aspect of our society for so long, that we came to believe that this goodness was somehow just innate within us. This was something innate to humanity, perhaps, as a whole, but even more so and more pertinently, I think, something innate to being British. In our pride, we began to imagine that this is just who we are. We Brits are just inherently kind, good, honest, fair-minded, decent people. We stopped recognizing that our ideas about what constitutes goodness and decency and fair-mindedness actually came to us from the Bible, from Jesus and the Christian faith. It's Christian teaching passed down through the generations that taught us right and wrong, good and evil, and which collectively formed our sense of morality and gave us this Christian nation that we know and love today with its culture and traditions. And that has been the source of our blessing in this country. We had a lovely society, not because of who we are, but because of who Jesus is and what he taught us. Look back to pre-Christian times in the British Isles, and we were just as violent and depraved as anyone. Our pagan ancestors, the Druids, would perform human sacrifices and ritual drownings. It is nothing innate. We were just as savage as anyone before Christianity came to civilize us. And we owe it all to Jesus and the fact that our ancestors embraced his teaching and let it guide their lives and then passed it down to us. And that goes for other Western nations as well. And the problem is that for the past 70 plus years, we have rejected the source of our blessing. We have rejected Jesus Christ. We've left our churches empty. We've abandoned the Bible and believed in the conceit of our hearts that we could continue to have Christendom without Christ himself, that we could have the blessings of Christianity without Christianity itself, all of the rewards, but none of the responsibilities. And it just doesn't work. We are all innately sinful human beings. That's the truth of it. Wherever you come from, whatever the color of your skin, we're all prone to self-interest. There's nothing special about being a Brit. So if you want a high-trust society full of individuals who are kind, honest, selfless, and good, it won't happen by itself. You need to invest in it by embracing the faith that is Christianity, that has a history of making people kind, honest, selfless, and good. And for generations now, secular Britain has not done that. Instead, you've mocked Jesus. You've undermined Christian doctrine and only Christian doctrine. You've attacked Christianity endlessly, never any other religion, only Christianity. You've torn it down at every opportunity. You've tried to chase the Bible out of schools and halls of government. You've started arresting Christians for sharing their faith or singing or praying in public, even silently. You've tried to hound it out of sight. You've ignored the church buildings in your community. And on Sunday mornings, you've decided to sleep in or play golf instead. But it was in those church buildings that your forefathers and mine were taught about love, truth, integrity, honesty, decency, and self-sacrifice, qualities required to build and sustain happy, healthy, prosperous societies. They were learning in those churches what it meant to be good, what it took to be good. They created the good societies. They bequeathed the blessings of those societies to you and me, and you rejected it. You mocked it. In your pride, you thought you didn't need church anymore. You didn't need the Bible. You didn't need Christ. So you turned on it, and in doing so, you turned on the source of your blessing. It's like taking a pickaxe to the foundations of your civilization, and now we're suffering the consequences. It's because we have abandoned Christianity, nothing more or less, that our society is failing. These weak, woke leaders that you currently despair about, I despair about them as well, have come to the fore in our time, not by coincidence, but because we've stopped generating the type of leaders that Christianity used to make in our culture. Leaders of integrity who understood from Jesus that to lead, you have to serve. It was Jesus who taught us this concept of servant leadership when he washed his disciples' feet. We learned from Jesus that leadership is actually about self-sacrifice, not self-promotion or self-interest. We learned that from his death on the cross. So why don't we see leaders that embody these concepts anymore? Because we don't have Christian leaders who've imbibed this teaching, and so they're reverting to type. They're reverting to self-interest. The reason the religion of woke has become so powerful in our time is because when you rejected Christianity, it created a vacuum of meaning in people's hearts, and so the shallow, empty pastiche has come in to take its place. The reason everyone wants to be an insufferable activist these days is because of a search for meaning. When you destroyed Christianity, you took that away, and now they're lost. They don't know why they're here. And now they're attaching their search for meaning into these misguided ideologies like climate change and other woke issues. It's all happening because you abandoned Jesus, the source of your blessing. Catherine Bennett's right. You're annoyed that all this blessing is disappearing and you're being overrun. I am too. But the question remains, where have you been for the past 70 years? In the Bible, we see that when Israel abandoned God, it became internally weak, and that allowed invading forces to come in and conquer the land. The Babylonians did this. It's happening in the UK right now as well. Christians have been telling you that this would happen for a long time based on biblical knowledge. In fact, I made a series over 12 years ago now called Stay Free, Why Society Can't Survive Without God, explaining that if we abandoned God in this country, we'd fall into the hands of tyrants. I made a more recent series called Trench, explaining that the end point of postmodernism was going to be far left tyranny. This was all based on biblical precepts. So if you're in mourning, if you're feeling pain that the society you loved is being overrun and destroyed and authoritarian tyrants are in office ruling with an iron fist, then I empathize. I feel it too. I really do. But there's one thing you need to understand. You only get Christendom if you're willing to come to Christ. This whole country needs to get down on its knees in repentance. This whole country needs to sell out every bookstore of every Bible currently in stock. This country needs to pack out the churches that remain across this land this Sunday and start learning how to live righteous lives again. And just maybe there might still be a chance. The Bible says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. The answer to this is not burning things and looting, and I must be very clear on that. The answer to all of this is Jesus. You need to come back to Jesus.